I'm here with my friend, as ever, Anne Laure Jackson, sensory specialist occupational therapist. Hello, Anne.
Hello, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Cool. Now, every week we meet, we talk about sensory health. We talk about the implications of good sensory health and how we try and get that. And we look at some bad problems of sensory health and trying to get the gap between them to get smaller by getting more towards good sensory health. But all sorts of things can affect our sensory health.
Absolutely anything. And that's the thing, because our senses are the foundations of how we live life and how we experience life. Any of those senses can then affect how we respond to it, and therefore how well we feel in our relationships, in the environments that we work in the environments that we live in. It just touches every single aspect of life, really.
And of course, if you've then got poor sensory health, it's going to affect everything because your senses, it's not like you can think, well, I'll turn off the interoceptive stuff. We'll turn off the auditory processing. I mean, yes, you can wear a headset, and there are, I guess, some senses are easier to, let's say, trick and to maybe dull, a bit like a volume switch to some extent. But of course, there are other ones that we can't.
Yeah, we don't have earlids. We do have eyelids, so we can, to a degree, like close our eyes, but then it's not really not that helpful to go around with your eyes closed. And we can't switch our skin off, which time and time again, even this week in the coaching, it keeps coming back. It's the skin system. When we've got aggression in the family, when we've got real irritation, when there's real fighting between siblings, when there's issues of concentration at school, it's just like we must look at the tactile system. We've got to look at the skin, because you can't turn the skin off. And when the skin is constantly being stimulated by experiences that are not perceived well, it really affects people's irritability, their concentration, their focus, and their ability to feel their own bodies to be coordinated. So it's huge. There's been a lot of discussions, especially about the skin system. But yeah, that's another one. We can't switch that one off. Absolutely.
The skin makes sense because there's all sorts of patches that we can have now for all sorts of medical health conditions where you have a topical little patch of some sort because the skin absorbs in a way that's so unique to it, which is amazing. But it just strikes me that if we can think, well, a little patch on the arm can help us with our hormones or not to smoke or whatever it might be. Well, the skin's kind of important, and look at what it can do. Not only can we feel things, we can absorb things through our skin. So if we can absorb chemicals and drugs from the doctors, then actually we can absorb through our skin, I guess, in a sense, some of the negative stuff as well.
Yeah. That's a really good, as ever. That's a really good way of seeing it, that people can see just that tiny little bit of skin. If you were to look like, kind of like, if you just took a centimeter, the thousands of the things that are happening within that tiny little space within the skin is quite remarkable. And all the different aspects of touch and temperature and pressure and discrimination to be able to pick out the detail and things. Just remarkable. A remarkable organ is our skin system.
Which reminds me, oddly, just go with this. So they were filming one of the James Bond films long time ago, and one of the actresses had to be painted all over her body. So they just did a complete all over body paint. They now know that's really dangerous because you have to leave some patch of the skin that is not covered in paint. As much as it might be thorough, actually, that I think the actress died. Was it? She actually died on it, I think, or was severely ill. Whichever way it was, doesn't really matter because your body needs to breathe. The skin needs to breathe. So if you paint over the entirety of the skin, now your skin isn't able to function as it needs to.
And from a sensory processing and integration perspective, it's just like you have no idea. Our skin tells us where our body boundaries are, where we finish and someone else starts. We're very secure in space. We're very secure sitting on a chair. We're very secure sitting anywhere if we can feel our skin systems well. And the moment that you don't, you're either hyper reactive, you're over responsive to touch, and therefore you're on alert all the time, thinking, is somebody going to touch me? Is somebody going to come behind me unexpectedly? Or you're bothered by the tags in your clothes, the feeling of the texture. if you're closed, or if you're under-responsive, you're sitting there and you actually, unless you move, and that's why we have a lot of our moving individuals, you're not getting that sensation through your skin system. So it's like, where is my body? Am I going to fall off this chair? And people do fall off their chairs. That is connected to the vestibular sense, and there are other senses as well. But the touch system, yeah, if you can't feel like the bottom, if for those who are sitting down at the moment as you're listening, your brain, now I mention it, your brain can go to your legs and you can pay attention to the fact that you can feel the pressure of your body on the seat. And you can imagine if you didn't have that pressure, if you can't pay attention to it, you'd be thinking, am I standing? Am I sitting? Whereabouts am I? You're then reliant on your eyes to tell you, this is where I am. Oh, I'm actually quite lower down, so I must be sitting rather than standing up at this point. So many of these things are that basic that we don't even think about how important and how valuable they are.
I guess I'm thinking now, I'm sitting on a chair. I can feel the pressure on my butt because I'm sitting down. I've got a backrest, so I can now feel that. And I can actually, as I'm sitting here, think, okay, it's less pressure as I go further up because I know there's a little curve in the chair, which I guess is for ventilation. So actually, I can feel that. And it's phenomenal what I can feel, but that's all because of my skin.
Uh-huh. It's all because of your skin. And that just literally those bits. And then there are some people, we call it habituation, whereas they would be conscious of that feeling. So for the whole time that we're here sitting chatting, somebody would be aware of that. So again, or if you were to slightly move position in your chair, you'd have that slight different pressure. So your brain would pay attention to that rather than what I'm saying. So it's really hard to have a conversation with someone. It's really hard to focus on what's going on in your team meeting or at school or at home, because actually you're paying attention to what your skin system is telling you all the time. So we have an ability, we need to be able to switch off those receptors. Our brain needs to switch off what it's perceiving, what it's picking out in the environment. And that's where a lot of our ADHD in particular issues come in, because of the attention issues, because our brain is concentrating on sensory information rather than habituating to it, rather than perceiving it, but then forgetting it, because actually it knows it's not important. It is more important to listen to what is being said or what is happening in the environment. And some brains struggling with that.
I suppose in a way, it's a bit like right now, the messages to my brain about where I'm sitting and how I'm sitting and the pressure on my lower back and my backside, they're quite quiet, I suppose, is my way of thinking about it. I'm aware of them. I know I'm sitting. I can feel a little bit of pressure, and if the pressure starts to mount on one side of my thigh, okay, I know I'm starting to lean, which I'm now doing on the camera if you can't see this, and as I lean back again, I can feel that. But I would sort of describe that as it's a very quiet message to my brain, which isn't really overriding, because I can still concentrate on you, I can look at the time, I can check the volume levels, and it's not interfering with those things, although I'm conscious of it. But it's a very quiet messaging system, if you like, in my own little mind. But actually, when you've got a bit of a screw sticking through the chair, well, that's going to start shouting, as it should, because your nerves are going to be saying, hello, we have a major problem here. Could you please investigate and sort this, because it hurts? So all of a sudden, it's going to start shouting. But I suppose from what you're saying, if you've got an overreactive skin system or interpretation of what your skin's doing, it's a bit like the shout we get from sitting on a nail, which you want your body shouting about, because get off the nail. But actually, that shout is sort of replicated even for stuff that we would associate and assume is, well, you're just sitting down. What's the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's so important we let folks know this, because they really see this as being naughty and bad and all the rest of it. And it's just like, and there's discipline that comes in instead. And it's just like, well, let's help them see, help people understand that it is like having that screw coming through the chair. It is like having permanent sunburn, that if you come up and if you touch somebody in a way that they don't like it, that is going to hurt in a way for them, the way that they perceive it. But yeah, absolutely. Our certain sensory pathways are literally being a screaming to the brain, and that really dysregulates people. It puts them really on edge, and is not a place for that calm, content, confident persona that is the best place to be, really.
Is that what we might then incorrectly perceive as just a child who fidgets? Why can't you just sit still like everybody else? yes, maybe they're being naughty and maybe they're not concentrating, but they could be hot, they could be fed up, just normal physical stuff, physiological things. But also equally, it could be their system just cannot sit still because it needs to move, because that's how they regulate their body.
Yeah, and that's how they know where their body is, so totally. Some people will be moving because they need to put, we call it giving themselves that proprioceptive input to try and calm down the irritability in their sensations. So they'll use their muscle work, they'll use their body core muscles to move, so that the brain gets this lovely organizing proprioceptive input that's really calming to anybody's system. So they might be bothered in their hearing, in their vision, in their skin system, in their smell. There's lots of areas that they might be bothered in those sensory issues. Or on the other side, they're moving because literally, they can't feel where they are. They have to move so that they get the sensations through their vestibular system, which is in the inner ear. They get that information through the muscles and the joints, and by moving, they get the information through their tactile system too. So they're more able to concentrate by moving, which is ironically not normally what people think.
Would this be in any way likened to, if somebody that we know has Parkinson's disease, we associate commonly a obvious physical side effect of that would be their sort of shaking the hand or whatever. It doesn't stop moving. Now, we don't say to them, can't you just sit still? I mean, honestly, seriously, can you just hold your hand? It's really annoying. We would never dream of saying that especially if we know someone's got Parkinson's, because we know now that physiologically their brain is sending messages a bit confused, the nerves are a little bit upset, and it creates what we see as the sort of stereotypical shaking of the hand or whatever it might be. But we wouldn't then say to them, well, just sit still, for goodness sake, can't you just sit still? We wouldn't ever dream of doing that. Is that the same kind of issue that we have with people who can't sit still? Should we be seeing that in the same sort of compassionate context?
I think the reasons, the neurological bits and pieces and the reasons are different, but the result should be the same. So absolutely, that sense of compassion, that sense of there's something else going on. So Parkinson's and other neurological disorders will have their own issues going on in the brain, and they're not clearly, or they're not clinically sensory processing and integration issues, because we have a central nervous system issue, but the results are exactly the same. So you don't tell someone with Parkinson's, you don't expect those things of it. And the same way that if they have the sensory processing issues, or if anybody is behaving a little bit differently, I would always, number one, go with compassion first. And then, once there's been space and time to work out, if you think actually, yeah, they're just being a bit naughty today, we just need to say just need to say a few things, and that's okay. But go sensory first, compassion first, and then follow up if that's not working, or there really isn't a route. If you've done a good assessment, and that's the other thing, actually need to make sure that people know how to actually assess these things, so that we can confirm if it is a sensory issue or if it isn't, or if it's a neurological issue or if it isn't, and then address that accordingly. So yeah, compassion would always be my number one, followed by
it should be for everybody.
Should be just because it's nice, and like life is hard enough. Life really is hard enough.
I don't think I've shared this one before. I was sat in an assembly, primary school. So what would I been 4 to 8, I think, around that age. And we were sat in an assembly, and there was this person talking. I had no concept of what they were talking about. I was so immensely bored. I was just, when are you going to show? I'm going to die of boredom soon. Is it possible? Can you die of boredom? It was awful. I don't know what they talked about. But we, of course, in school, expected sit down, be still, say nothing, just listen. And the problem is, active listening requires participation at some level. And we can have passive listening. Yes, we can sit there. But as a 4 to an 8-year-old, listening to a really boring person with a really dull voice, this is what I remember going, even now, thinking, I don't care what you're talking about. I just want you to go away. Now, in the middle of this, was getting more and more fidgety and getting more frustrated, because the more fidgety I got, the more I'm thinking I'm going to get in trouble soon for not sitting still. And then I got so bored, I had this massive yawn. Now, it wasn't on purpose. I was really bored. I cannot express this enough. And a huge yawn, and all the teachers, whoa, straight looking at me. How dare you yawn? And I just think, but this is really boring. And my yawn is a physiological response to the fact that this person needs to never ever talk to a child ever again without help. And the thing is, it's very easy for those teachers to look at me and say, you've just been naughty, you're terrible, you've yawned, look at all the other peers, as they said later to me. I remember that conversation. I remember thinking, but I was bored stiff. This was dull, uninteresting. I couldn't access what they were saying. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. And it was a hot room. It's like, how many more things? Even then, I'm thinking, but it's hot and I'm bored and I want to drink. Can't have a drink. You'll need the toilet. Now I'm dehydrated. Thankfully, schools have got better and realized dehydrating children is not actually a good way of helping children to do better in school.
No, no. But I was like in school this week. I mean, I was shocked again because you kind of forget that there are strict times to go to the toilet in many of the schools. And I just think, oh, crumbs, I'd forgotten that that is a thing. Just like, oh, that's really hard. So I'm hoping I'm speaking to educators where there is that flexibility that you can actually go to the loo if you need to go to the loo. But do you try and concentrate when you need the loo? It's like, or if you're thirsty, or if some things it's like, man, we've put a lot of expectations and a lot of extra pressure on our physiological systems in a way that's really not helpful conducive for learning, conducive for the best behavior.
I do understand the problems that teachers have of needing to be able to control all the children in their class in a safe and appropriate way. But I'm also very conscious as a parent, and when my kids are growing up, thinking, but they need to drink more than they need to not go to the toilet. And when they drink, they need to go to the toilet. And if they are actually more hydrated, they'll be far more attuned into what you're going. And actually, in some ways, children come in and going sensibly. And of course, we know children will extend those boundaries. But actually, it's so much better. And I do remember when we home educated, the thing that my two older boys were so excited by was, I can have a wee if I want one. Well, yes, of course you can, but I hadn't thought about that. Here's another aside for you. So the Mythbusters one time tested our bladders against concentration. So they had this driving exercise. So can they drive this sort of little obstacle course thing in a car? How long would that take? How accurate would they be? Would they drive over the cones? And then they got the doctor that looks after the bladder, one of those, with an ultrasound, so they could see when one of the two members of the presenters, when the bladder was actually biologically full. And then he had to wait and then do the same test. And he was driving over the cones. He wasn't concentrating. All he wanted to do was to get to the end, didn't care about the process, did not do a good job, which really highlighted for me the fact that drinking is really important. Otherwise, you're dehydrated. Really, really bad for learning. You physically can't learn because the brain dries out and then you just get more aggressive and more fidgety, and it doesn't help. We've seen a better change in schools for that, I think, in the last 10 years of children need to drink, whatever the consequence, especially on hot days. But it was fascinating just to watch how atrocious the drive was second time round with a properly full bladder, as checked by a doctor, because they couldn't concentrate.
But these basic physiological things, that's interoception, the ability to be able to feel what's going on the inside. And then there are some people who are also, that is pure neurophysiological. And then you've got the ones that are overreactive. So again, they will perceive for those of us that are more typical, we will perceive the sensations that our bladder is getting, is starting to get full, and we can generally hold on a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And then there comes a point where, like your driver, it's just not helpful anymore, and there's just have to go. Those that have an overreactive interoceptive system will pick up the signs, feeling that their bladder is full when it's only about half full, or somewhere along that spectrum. So they will need to go to the loo more often, just as a way of saying, these are the signals that my brain is getting, and you're always better to be safe, well, nearly always better to be safe than sorry, because obviously having accidents, that doesn't give that's no good for anybody. So there are some who, if teachers or parents are thinking, oh, but you only just went 10 minutes ago, there is a little bit of grace is needed in that, because okay, the bladder is unlikely physically to fill up that full within 10 minutes, but there's a way of honoring that, so that a fine balance can be brought, so that they will need to go more often, they will feel more comfortable, whether physically they actually produce anything and release what's in their bladder or not. Because their brains will still be computing, I need to go, I need to go. Therefore, they cannot concentrate with even the smallest amount of liquid in the bladder. So it's a fine balance, but again, just pay attention. Even though physiologically they've got plenty of room in their bladder, their interoceptive system might be on more of a high alert and overreactive. So it's better to let them go more frequently, even though physically they don't need to, if that makes sense.
I think it does. This is not criticizing the schools or teachers. It's just, I thought it was interesting to think about how we have perceived things, and some of those things have changed over time. So dehydrating children, which is what I had at school, no drinking, because if you have a drink, you'll need the toilet. Well, yes, that's how the system works. That's what's supposed to happen. Yes, but it's disruptive. Well, maybe, but actually, teaching children to be dehydrated is a really bad thing, and staying hydrated is a very good thing. I can see teachers and doctors sort of, opposing views of what's good and what's healthy, and there is a balance to be had, and that's something that I know we've talked about many times. Is there is right and wrong, there is good and bad, there is naughty and there's well behaved. There are going to be children and adults who extend their what they want to have. I mean, the smoking break is the same sort of thing in my mind as the toilet. Okay, I'm going to go home an hour early today to your boss. What do you mean? Well, I fancy going home. I fancy some fresh air. I'll just go and do that. Well, why? Well, I don't smoke. I'll have me extra hour, thanks. I'll just go home early. We wouldn't do that kind of thing. And yet there are those who I know who smoked back in the day, and they would smoke lots of little bits of a cigarette just to get out of the office. So it's an excuse. Now, that's not okay. I don't think smokers should ever be allowed time. Sorry, tough. If you smoke, then go on your lunch break. Or we all have to have the same thing, because we're trying to create a balance in society, aren't we, where there is sort of a normal, although, as we said, 2.4 children average. Where's that 0.4 child? Because we're always trying to put people in boxes, but actually, compassion.
And knowing that, just we have to stay on toileting, because it's such a good example. These smoke breaks and the break. What those breaks do? They allow you to move, so it gets you away from maybe like it might be a noisy office. It's like looking when people go out. What is it that they're going out for? Is it genuinely for a smoke? Is it genuinely for the toilet? Or are they trying to say to you, look, I've been sitting down for too long and my vestibular system needs to move. I am going to fall asleep. This is like really. I've reached my own personal limit, and it's a reasonable. It's one of the only things you can possibly leave somewhere for of those two options. So it's like how can we create space within the day where people can move, people can go for quiet. Somehow, even whether it be in the classroom or whether it be within an office space, what are those things that we can provide so that people can just go and do that without needing to have the smoke break, without needing to have the toilet break? If those aren't the actual genuine issues, it's more the environment. They're overwhelmed with the noise. It's an open plan office. There's just been too much way too much happening in the class, and way too much happening in the actual house. At home as well. So it's how can we find those spaces within home, schools, workplaces, so that people can just retreat, do something for 2-3 minutes, but still be part of the environment if it's important that they're actually in that environment and still learning. I'm just thinking. So swings. This is like, I cannot believe now the number of teachers that are just saying, I'm so glad we have that swing in the back of the class. Because that child is just really, really happy to be there, and they would have been so disruptive if they weren't given something that they could move on, so they can learn. They're not disrupting the rest of the class, and they're engaged. And it's just like it's a win-win. But it's a massive mental shift to be able to provide something like that within a home or a school or a workplace.
Culture. We need to change the culture. I did a week of agency work many, many years ago in a factory where we had well, lots of devices that could kill you quite successfully. And what they realized as a factory where we took metal and bent them, cut them, shaped them, and all that rest of it, my particular machine, metal sheet would put in, I press two buttons, and then this thing would come down to bend the metal to a perfect right angle. It would then go on to a different process. But what threw me was the culture in that factory was, if you want the toilet, go to the toilet. If you want a drink, go and get a drink. Want to sit and have a chat with your friends? Do that. And they saw the productivity go up, and most importantly, accident rates went down. Now, if those presses, there's all sorts of safety designs in place. Yes, you've got to touch these two buttons, and you know that you can't get your fingers under the thing. You can still have something fall on one of those. It's still a dangerous working environment, trust me. But they changed the culture of the factory. So because I was a new guy working for the week or however long they didn't know, one of the forklift drivers came and just had a natter. And I was like, I'm supposed to get the work done. He said, no, we don't do that here. We have a relaxed because it does better. So the entire culture of this big factory with, I don't know, several hundred people working was, if you want to have a stop, a smoke or a drink or a break, have a chat with someone, do that, because they saw that, one, people aren't losing their fingers anymore, which is a good thing, because how much of a health and safety nightmare is that for productivity? And also people do better in short bursts and are better able to concentrate if they're not just going on and on and on, which also reminds me of a friend who talks about quality control checking and the sensory stuff. And this is interesting because after so many of looking at the same thing to check for quality, you cannot anymore spot for errors, because your brain has now seen 20 or whatever the number was. They had to literally break up the rolls in this office because it was stamping all these parts that were going out for car manufacturing. But quality control goes out the window at 20 or whatever it was, because now you can't see the errors because you can just see the entirety of the thing. So even that, it's realizing, you know, you can't just get people going on and on and on, because you know what? The brain physically can't cope.
Yeah. Yeah, I was having goosebumps the whole time you were just chatting there. I just thought, you know, that's what we need within boundaries, within limitations, but freedom within that. But I think it's the same way when I introduce certain things that are new. Into schools or into workplaces, it's always, you know, people will take advantage initially. I think that's the human nature, but a little bit of kind of like, let's bring back a bit of trust and respect, because I think people take advantage of it. But then there's a sense of, oh, actually, do I really want to spend as much time? I actually really enjoy the work. I actually want to get back, and after that little bit of rebelliousness, if especially if people have been brought up in a system where it's been that tight and they haven't been given that freedom, people might take advantage of that freedom and that relaxed and that honoring approach. But I think if we believe in people, the majority of people will actually respond really, really well to that, and will self-regulate in that way, and therefore do exactly what they need to do to function well. And I suppose in a way it's a bit like me being self-employed, the way that I run my own life, that I can choose when I want to work. And although I work an awful lot because I love it, I haven't been sick for a lot. COVID was basically it, unless there's massively something else happening. But it's been about 25 years, and I've hardly had any time off, because it is a work-life integration. It's a work-life balance, whatever you want to call it. It flows because I'm able to control most of what I do and when I do it. Yes, in a way it's a luxury, but should it be a luxury? Isn't that something that we can develop into that whole, you know, change the way we school, change the way that we educate, change the way that we work. But just little shifts. It doesn't need to be massive, but some shifts would you know, make a significant difference for some, if not all.
For alliteration purposes, we need a third C, because we've got compassion and we've got culture. What would be a third C that we can stick onto this?
The first one that came to mind was control, but that could be taken like either way. But it's this sense of just empowering people to trust, and that they have an element of control over their lives. But it's not about controlling others. It's just being able to take control so that they can keep themselves in the best health. But we'll keep working on the third C and see if something else comes too.
But isn't it interesting? You immediately thought control. Oh, hang on, that's negative. because we think that controlling something is always a bad thing, but having the ability to control our own environment around us is actually important. And actually, when you see the child or the adult you graze their arm because you think you're being loving by being, I'll give some tactile response and I'll touch their arm, they then fly off the handle. Well, actually, they need some control over their own body in terms of, please don't touch me like that, because I really don't like that. Some people are huggers. I don't mind having a hug. Some people, you can see them, yes, hello, how are you? Arms folded. If you come near me, this is going to end poorly. And that's fine. Which is why I always say, if you want to hug someone, please ask them if it's okay. And don't say, it's okay to have a hug, isn't it, as you're grabbing them. Ask permission would be a great thing. But ask permission about the person that's struggling, fidgeting on a seat. Like, can we talk to you about, are you struggling with something? Not what's wrong with you because you're fidgeting, because now we've lost the compassion and now we're controlling the conversation again. But actually, if we give control to people healthily, which is what we try and do in our children, isn't it? We try and help them to understand how to control their environment in an appropriate way, whether it's crossing a road, take control. Yes, don't just wander off. Have a look. Make sure you're sure. Is there a vehicle coming? Stop, look, and listen. All that. Well, that's controlling, but that's a good thing.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest. The thing that comes back time and time again on the coaching is you can tell it in the parents, where it's just like they took control, where the young person is starting to advocate for themselves, is starting to realize this is what they need to do, whether it be, I really need to wrestle before I get my clothes on, that really helps me. And they're starting to feed back, or at school, they're saying, if I could just do this instead, and that there's a sense of empowerment but it's working. And that's the whole point. Empowerment, taking control should be about making things better for everybody. Yeah.
I've got maybe a partial alliteration. Changing culture with compassion. There you are.
Like that. Like that. We should really need to take these quotes and stick them out on social media. This is like the Andy B and the Anne Laure. It's sparking stuff. It's good stuff. It's really good. Really
it is good, but don't make a point. Ask a question. Have a little bit of compassion. I think that's one of our first points, wasn't it? Just ask the question. Observe for a little bit. Are they always like this? Well, they're probably not being naughty, then, are they? If it's a random and they usually really well behave, well, actually, that's a flag of a problem. Not necessarily anything really nefarious. They could just be hot or thirsty or needing the toilet. Who knows? But they're bored. I mean, that's another one. Boredom is a very real thing. It can lead to great creativity, but boredom within a very specifically controlled environment doesn't create much good of anything. Just rebellion, normally. Compassion. Changing culture with compassion.
There you go.
Right. Thank you, Anne. If you've got any questions or responses or comments on any of this, you can get in touch with us. I'll put those to Anne. Hello at pure247radio.org. Hello at pure247radio.org. You can email questions to that. And if you want to connect with Anne and her coaching and all of her experience, just go to pure247radio.org, pure247radio.org/ALJ. Anne Laure Jackson. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you. See you next time.